Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. So today I'm doing my November wrap up. I had such a good reading month. Looking at the ratings, it actually seems to be a bit up and down, but overall it felt like I had a really good reading month, and I completed one readathon, which was the Fall into Fantasy readathon as well. I'm going to go through in chronological order, so the Fall into Fantasy will be kind of in the middle bit, and yep, these will all be spoiler free, so you don't need to worry about that. So, first book I read was Dead Gone by Luca Veste. This actually turned out to be really disappointing. It was like, I read it because it's a thriller and it's set in Liverpool, which is near where I'm from, and that part was really good. Like, the part about Liverpool was amazing, and it had a really good detailed description of different places, and that part was quite cool. The problem was the thriller part. So the plot is about a detective who's trying to solve a string of murders of university students, and it's never a good sign when it reaches the reveal and you don't remember the character that the killer is. Like, it was really bad. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars, which isn't great, which is such a shame because, like I said, at the start I was really enjoying it. It was just the actual mystery part that let it down. I've got another book by Luca Veste on my TBR, which is The Bone Keeper, and I'm hoping that will be better because it sounds like that's got a really strong plot. So thankfully the next book I read was a 4-star read, and that was Alice by Christina Henry. I thought it would be. She's one of my favourite authors, so I was hoping it would be good, and it was. Like an alternative Alice in Wonderland type story. It's kind of weird, it's hard to explain. So it's a fantasy book, and it's about this girl called Alice, and she got sent to a mental asylum, and she makes friends with this guy called Hatcher, which is meant to be like the Hatter, and then they end up going on this quest together to defeat this Jabberwocky, but it also ends up to be like a quest to kind of explore Alice's past. Trigger warning, there is lots and lots and lots of sexual abuse stuff in this book, literally tons. I wasn't expecting it. It is really good. I wasn't sure how I felt about it until the end, and I absolutely loved the ending, so I gave it 4 stars. And yeah, it is very dark. It is definitely a horror book, unlike the other Christina Henry book I read, Lost Boy, which is classed as a horror, but I don't think it's quite dark enough to be a horror. This one is definitely a horror. It's got some really awful stuff in it, but if you've got the stomach for it, it's definitely a really good read, and it's definitely a unique take on Alice in Wonderland. So after reading that, I was in a massive Christina Henry mood, and I reread Lost Boy by her, which I actually have in physical form, and it is signed, which I'm super happy about. But yeah, so this is a horror type version of Peter Pan. Really, it's the story of Hook from Peter Pan, and it's about him when he was one of the Lost Boys, and this became a 5-star read for me. I think when I originally read it last year I gave it maybe 4.5 stars, but no, it's definitely a 5-star read. Absolutely loved it. It was so nice to reread, and it's just great. The reason I don't think this is horror is because it's not like the Alice book where there's lots of horrific imagery. It's more a case of, it's a slow build. So at the start, Hook's one of the Lost Boys, and you think, oh, everything's wonderful in Neverland, but it's not. Peter's not a good person at all, and bit by bit you find out more about him, and it's all kind of horrific. And yeah, if you haven't read it, I'd strongly recommend it. It's really good. Absolutely loved it. So the next book was one that was on my TBR list, and it is The Innocent Wife by Amy Lloyd. This was an enjoyable thriller. I gave it 3.5 out of 5, and it's kind of just your standard thriller. It's about a woman who starts contacting a guy who's in prison for murder of these young girls, and then he gets let out and she has to live with him. And it's kind of about whether or not he really did it, and there's sort of more to it than that, but it was interesting enough. It was really well written. There is some weird feminism stuff in here that And I'm very feminist, don't get me wrong. Usually I don't mind at all when a book goes down that route, but it was very misplaced. So when the husband gets out of prison, he's not a particularly nice person. And the way they show this is by him having kind of outdated views, but they're really clunky in their positioning in the story. So he'll just sort of, he just goes on a random rant about how it's not fair for people of colour to say that white people are privileged because he grew up poor and he's not privileged, and the main character's like, oh, that's not what it's all about at all, but then she never says what it is actually about, and then they just kind of drop that conversation and move on with their lives. But like, yeah, it just has weird moments like that. And there's another one that's a feminist moment that I don't even remember now, and they kind of throw you because they took me out the story, and I guess I get what the author was trying to do, but I don't think it was particularly done well. But yeah, it was an alright thriller. I'd read more by the author, and yeah, it was enjoyable. I was in the mood for a good thriller, so it fulfilled that need. So the next book I read, unfortunately, was not a good thriller, and that was Method 15/33 by Shannon Kirk. I think I got the title of this wrong in my TBR because I thought it was just called The Method, but it's not. It's called Method 15/33, and this is the thriller about a pregnant teenager who gets kidnapped and held hostage because the people want to take her baby when it's born. This was really bad. I gave it 1 out of 5 stars, and I almost never give books 1 star, but it was A, pretty boring, B, badly written. So the teenage girl, there's alternating points of view with a member of the police force. He's like a special FBI agent or whatever, and he's got the exact same voice as this teenage girl. The teenage girl character was not written like a teenage girl at all. She wasn't even written really like a real person, and she kind of has like a condition that's meant to explain that, but I just think it was bad writing. Like, you couldn't tell the difference between reading from the point of view of a 16-year-old who's pregnant and a like 30-something-year-old who's in the FBI, and that shouldn't be how it is. The story didn't really go anywhere, I wasn't really particularly engaged, and the ending was just kind of rubbish. So yeah, unfortunately I really didn't enjoy that book. It's probably going to be on my worst books of the year list, to be honest, but yeah. Hopefully we now reach the Fall into Fantasy readathon books. I was super happy about this because almost all of them were 4 or higher reads for me. The first one I read was Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie Dow, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5. This is a Asian-inspired retelling of the Evil Queen story from Snow White, and it's about a protagonist, Shifong, who is told from a very young age by her aunt that she is destined to become the Empress and marry the Emperor if she follows what these tarot cards tell her to do, and it requires a sacrifice on her part. She's also raised to do this kind of dark magic which involves eating the hearts of animals. The problem is Shifong is in love with this boy called Wei. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but he is unaware of her destiny, and she's convinced that he's the sacrifice that she's going to have to give up to become the Empress. This was a really engaging story. It was almost perfectly paced. It was really interesting. I loved the whole magical concept. I loved all the characters. They were really interesting. The only problem is this ending I thought was maybe a bit rushed. It's a duology, so I know they were setting it up for the sequel, but it felt like a lot was suddenly skimmed over, which I didn't appreciate. And Wei was maybe a bit flat as a character. He wasn't particularly engaging, but I really, really loved the story. It was so good. I highly recommend it if you're into fantasy. And yeah, I'm so glad I read it. The next book I read was Girls of Paper and Fire, which I keep calling Girls Made of Paper and Fire. It's not. This is by Natasha Ngan, and I gave this 4 stars out of 5, so I rated it slightly lower than Forest of a Thousand Lanterns. This has kind of a similar premise but a completely different tone to Forest. So this is about a girl who lives in a world where there's 3 castes. There are humans, there are half demon, half humans, and in this world demons take the form of animal characteristics, and then there are 100% demons who are just animals. And the king is a demon, and every year he takes 8 of the human caste, which is called the paper caste. He takes 8 girls from there, and they are his, for want of a better word, like concubines, for, I believe it's for a year, it might be for longer, I think it's for a year, and they basically have to serve his every whim. But this year our main character gets picked as the 9th paper girl because she's got these golden eyes and everyone thinks she's special because of it. And this is a really intense story. There are sexual abuse warnings, as you imagine. It's very grim in tone, and it also has, though, an girl-girl romance, which I really liked. I was super into that. So this again was a really well-written book. I think I read it in a day. I was so engaged with it. And the main problem with it is, and I know this isn't intentional by the author, but I can't help but read it into the text, so there's kind of a victim blaming thing going on, which is not okay at all. I don't know if anyone else has picked up on this, but basically the main character, and this isn't a spoiler, but the main character is the last one to get chosen by the Demon King to satisfy his needs, and she's very high and mighty about the whole thing. She's kind of, I don't know, she sort of blames the other girls and gets angry that they didn't fight back, and the story doesn't really support her being wrong. Like, I think it's meant to be a character flaw and you're not meant to agree with her, but the story doesn't necessarily support that, and I just made it hard for me to really like the protagonist because of the tendency to victim blame. It just gave some bits of kind of uncomfortable vibe, particularly with her partner. Like the girl she falls in love with, I wasn't really okay with the way she treated her, but I did really enjoy it. And yeah, I still gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good. I highly recommend it. Next 2 books I kind of read roughly at the same time. One, I'll talk about the one I didn't like first. So sadly, that was Beasts Made of Night by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is, I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars, and I looked at the Goodreads reviews after I read it, and most people didn't finish reading this, and I almost didn't finish reading this. I never ever stop a book before I finished it. I have this compulsive need to know the ending of all books, even books I absolutely hate, books I'm not enjoying at all. I have to read to the end. This one, I almost stopped reading it about 3 times. It's got an interesting idea behind it. It's about a world where the sins of people take the form of monsters, and there are specific types of people who can kill these monsters, and when they kill the monsters they have to then swallow the sin, and it becomes a mark on their arm that it's like a tattoo of the monster that they killed, and the bigger the sin, the bigger the monster. It was just, I don't think it was written particularly well. It really dragged. The main character I didn't engage with at all. His one personality trait seems to be talking about his hair, and that's like his entire character. I didn't really follow the story. There's a weird romance in it that I hated, and it doesn't do anything at all for the plot or the characters or anything. And I did skim read the last 100 pages, so I don't even really remember how it ends because I was so desperate to just get through it. So yeah, unfortunately I don't think I'll be reading the sequel for this, and I wouldn't recommend it particularly. Some people seem to have really liked it. I think maybe if you prefer a certain type of writing and don't care too much about in-depth characters, you might enjoy this more, but sadly it wasn't for me. But thankfully the other read for the Fall into Fantasy readathon was also a 4.5 star rating, and it was Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. I read Scythe about the start of the year, and I really enjoyed it, but I think I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars, whereas this one I absolutely loved. I was super engaged with it. It's the middle book of a trilogy, and normally the middle book of a trilogy has nothing in it that you know, it's kind of like a filler book. It sets up the big thing in the third book, and not in this book. The way this book ends is just, I'm not going to spoil it, don't worry, but I was shook, and I cannot wait for the sequel. I'm so hyped for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spoil Scythe but not Thunderhead, so I can talk more about the plot of Thunderhead now. So if you haven't read Scythe and you don't want it spoiled, jump ahead to the timestamp that I'll put in the description box below, so I'll give you a second to do that. Cool, we've all read Scythe or don't care about it, fab. So this book starts with Citra, who is now a Scythe, and she's doing really well. Everyone really respects her. And there is Rowan, who has become Scythe Lucifer, so he's put on a black gown, which is forbidden by all Scythes, and he's now hunting down the Scythes that have kind of broken the rules of Scythe, so he targets unethical Scythes. And there's also another character called Tolliver who has his own little quest to follow, and I think he's going to play a big part in the third one. But yeah, it was really good. The Thunderhead is also much more of a character, and that was really interesting. I don't know why I like this more than Scythe. I don't really remember Scythe that well, but I think it was more, it's not even that it's more political, because there's quite a lot of politics in Thunderhead, but Thunderhead's just, I don't know, I just found it really engaging. I really liked where the story went, and yeah, I just can't wait for the sequel at all. It's going to be so good. Yeah, so that was all my Fall into Fantasy books. I completed all of the challenges. I'll link that video below if you don't know what the challenges are or what books were fulfilling them. And yeah, apart from one book, they were all 4 or 4.5 star reads, which I consider a really good readathon, so I'm very happy with that. I've only got 4 more books that I'm talking about. So the next one that I read, unfortunately, was another bad read, and that was Darling by Rachel. I can't remember the surname, I'll pop it down below. But Darling is a thriller, loosely using the term, and this is just really weird. So it's about a black woman who marries a man, and he's got this stepdaughter called Lola who's 16, and the woman is called Darling, by the way, and her and Lola just don't get on, and it's kind of meant to be a thriller about that, but there's all this weird racism stuff. It's not really a thriller. I wouldn't classify it as a thriller. It's more just like a contemporary story with a darker edge to it, but it was okay. I just didn't like it very much. I found it a bit dull. I gave it 2.5 out of 5, and the ending doesn't make it worth reading for me. Yeah, it kind of does, it just got a unique concept, and I appreciate that, but I didn't really like either of the characters. And as some people have said, and I would agree with that, that the sections written by Lola are very immature. She's meant to be 16. It's kind of the opposite problem of the Method 15/33 book, where she's written too stupid for a 16-year-old, and I didn't like that at all. But yeah, unfortunately that wasn't great. I then read another thriller, which was The Visitors by Catherine Burns. I really liked this. I did give it a 3 out of 5. I might bump up to a 3.5 out of 5. I can see a lot of people not enjoying this. This is about a woman whose brother is keeping women kidnapped in the cellar, and that's basically the entire book. Our main character is very weak as a person. She's not very bright, and the story is really focused on her rather than her brother. The reason I think most people won't like this is it's very slow. I liked it as a character exploration of this main character, but it's not got a lot of thrills for a thriller, and I can see a lot of people who not liking the main character and finding it really boring because of that. But yeah, overall I did enjoy it. I was engaged throughout, and while it was slow, I didn't mind that so much because it did have the character exploration. So, almost done. The next book isn't really a book, but it is. But it is Alice in Tumblr-land by Tim Manley. This I read in like an hour. It's not a proper book. It's kind of got... I thought it had proper short stories, and so I'm a bit disappointed, but that's my fault for not doing the research. But it's got like little fairy tale snippets, and they're like humorous, so they're related to the modern day, and they kind of continue a story, so it'll go back to a character and the same story will be going on. So like Beauty and the Beast are trying to work out their relationship problems because the Beast just kind of plays Xbox all the time. Alice is logged onto Tumblr and is lost in Tumblr-land, and like, it was alright. I think the problem with this book is it made me quite depressed, and I don't think it's meant to do that. It's meant to be a humour book, but it's about millennial problems, and at the moment I am in a very happy relationship, but I'm living at home again, working in retail, trying to get my proper career started and getting onto a PhD and all that stuff. So I wasn't really in the right space of mind to read a book about all these millennials kind of failing at their jobs and stuff. It just kind of hit the wrong tone for me. I don't even know what I'd rate it as. A humour book. It's alright, it's enjoyable. I don't think it's worth whatever the extortionate amount that Amazon are charging for it. I think it's like £11 or something. I bought it second hand for £4, and even then I'm a bit like, probably wouldn't have paid that if I'd seen what it was like inside. But oh well, it was alright. And the final book I'm going to talk about in a separate video, so I'll link that down below when it's uploaded, but it was an ARC, and it's called Hark, the Herald Angels Scream, and it is a collection of Christmas themed horror stories by various authors. I'm not sure what the overall rating is. I'm going to do that in the video when I go over it in more detail, because it was an ARC that I was sent, so I want to give it its own space. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of hit and miss like most anthologies, but it's got some really good stories in it, and there weren't really any that I hated. But yeah, so that is all the books I read in November. Like I said, it felt like a really good reading month because I had loads of 4 or above star reads. I did have a couple of low ones as well, but it felt like I remembered the good star ones more, which is always good. Let me know what you read in November. Let me know if you read any books for the fall into fantasy, if you're excited to read Girls of Paper and Fire, because I know a couple of people I talked to on Tumblr, Twitter definitely are. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, it helps me out massively, and I hope to see you next time.